And so a little earlier, I spoke with the former Irish Prime Minister, or Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar. So, Mr Varadkar, it looks to a lot of people that as if we are living through a kind of huge, almost worldwide conservative revolution, nationalist revolution, which is changing our attitudes to everything from trade to gender to much else. Do you agree with that, or do you think that's going it a bit?
I agree to an extent. You know, from the time that the Berlin Wall fell to a couple of years ago, we had a move towards liberalism, a move towards globalism, a move towards a more international approach to trade and globalization. And then in the last couple of years, it didn't just happen last November. In the last couple of years, a move towards greater nationalism and also greater protectionism in economic policy. And we saw elements of that before the election of Trump the first time, Brexit, the move to the right across European countries. So this has been happening for a while, but I don't think it's done yet. And the pendulum can swing back and forth. And I think there is some early evidence that the decisions that President Trump has taken, particularly in relation to a more nationalistic approach to security and economics in America, is having an effect in places like the US, places like Canada and places like Australia, where we're seeing elections coming up, maybe even in Britain too. Prime Minister Starmer had a very difficult start as Prime Minister, and is now looking more assured and looking more like a statesman and looking more like a leader, in part because of the approach he's taken to Ukraine.
Right across Europe, not just in Britain, people are beginning to think maybe the old certainties about American support or shield for Europe, the American relationship, are coming unpicked and disentangled, and we have to look around the world and think differently. From your point of view, and you've watched Britain and you've watched what's going on in Brussels for a very long time, do you think this is the moment when Britain is going to have to turn pretty decisively back to the EU, and the EU is going to have to welcome that and perhaps behave a little differently?
Yes, I do, in short. You know, since 1945, we had a de facto Pax Americana across Europe and the United States, where we could rely on the US as a security partner, sheltering under their umbrella in many ways, and also as a reliable political and economic partner. That's no longer the case. You know, even if in 4 years' time a moderate Republican or a Democrat's elected, I don't think we can be certain that things are going to change back to the way they were before. The memory of that Second World War is now so far long ago that things are different, and it creates a decision point for the UK as to whether it wants to go it alone, which in many ways was the Brexit philosophy, a global Britain trying to form alliances with almost anyone, anywhere around the world, to one that sees itself at the heart of European security and as part of the European economy. And I really hope that's a decision that the UK takes.
I don't know if you get the impression that that is the way that Keir Starmer is leaning, but the other side of the argument, I guess, is how the EU responds and whether thinking in Brussels has changed or evolved as a result of what's happened. So, for instance, on the possible UK-EU defence and security pact, it all apparently depends upon what deal we do on fishing, which seems very much the old politics.
It does, and I think that's regrettable. It seems to me that the British government wants to come closer to the European Union, both in terms of the economic and trading relationship, and also the security relationship as well. And the EU should be open to that and should be willing to make concessions and, for want of a better word, be generous to the United Kingdom. The UK is a strong military power, has nuclear weapons, has a strong navy and air force. It's one of the top 10 economies in the world. It's not a small country. It has a lot to bring to the table, and it would be a real shame if the opportunity for an agreement fell on something like fishing quotas. I think that would be very short-sighted. But sometimes these things are just negotiations, and I actually think that won't be the sticking point in the end. That there'll be other questions that have to be discussed, but a lot of it really is going to be about how far Britain wants to go. One thing I find fascinating looking at it from afar is when I look at opinion polls, and I accept they are only opinion polls, you see a clear majority of Britons who think that Brexit was a mistake. You see a clear majority, particularly among younger people, who want to rejoin. And none of the four major UK-wide parties are giving expression to that. And that to me seems a little bit odd, but that is how it is. And that's something we have to accept as Europeans.
It's very hard observing from near at hand, but it does seem that the government is taking baby steps in that direction at the moment. There's much discussion, again, about reopening the youth mobility scheme that Britain left. And it does appear, LBC has been told, that doesn't seem to be ruled off. It's not off the table. Is that the kind of thing that would help?
I think that's mutually benefit to all sides. The UK would benefit from an injection of students and young people working in your economy. One of the bizarre outcomes of Brexit was increased immigration from outside of Europe, which I don't think was what the Brexiteers wanted. They would probably prefer to have migration from other parts of Europe as opposed to other parts of the world. So I think there's an opportunity there, and there's ways to do it. You can say it's a certain number of people, a maximum number of people every year under the age of 25 or under the age of 30. There's lots of ways to do that, but it does have to go in both directions. So, would, for example, give young British people the opportunity to study abroad, perhaps the UK rejoining the Erasmus programme, which I think would be very positive and very good for UK universities too, and also young British passport holders having the opportunity to work in Spain and Italy and Greece and France and Germany without having a visa. So, it definitely is something that can go in both directions, and it won't work unless it's in both directions.
Do you hear the creaking of doors opening on this?
I'm not sure yet. I'm gone from politics, so I'm not involved in the negotiations. I think there's definitely a lot to be said on a defence and security agreement. There's a lot to be said and a lot happening in relation to aligning our veterinary rules, which would be very helpful in relation to Northern Ireland in particular, in further reducing the remaining checks between Britain and Northern Ireland. I think there'd be no harm in dusting down the old backstop, the agreement negotiated between me and Theresa May and the European Union at the time, and that allowed for free movement of goods and dynamic alignment of regulations. That would, I think, give a boost to the British economy. What the UK needs more than anything else is economic growth, and that would help with that. But I don't think that it would ever be realistic to expect the United Kingdom just to be a rule taker. If the UK is going to align its regulations and standards with the UK, it would have to have a meaningful input into that.
Because this could sound slightly cynical, but we do seem to be at a moment when the EU needs the UK in its defence mode, at any rate, more than ever.
Yeah, look, the environment is different to what it was back in 2016, 2017. At that time, the UK took a decision to leave the European Union. There was a concern that other countries might follow. That concern is kind of gone now, in part because Brexit hasn't turned out all that well. People like Le Pen, who were previously talking about leaving the European Union, the AfD in Germany, they no longer talk about that. So, the concern that other countries might follow really is gone now. There's no majority or anything vaguely approaching it in any of the 27 member states to do that. But also the environment has now changed as well because of the geopolitical changes in the United States and, of course, Russia's attack on Ukraine. And Europe needs Britain as a major security and defence partner, but also a strong economy, one of the strongest economies in the world. And the closer we can get together, I think, the better for all of us.
Leo, you say you've left politics, but in a way you've jumped into another kind of politics because you're speaking to me from Harvard. And I just wonder, what are your reflections? Harvard is really, as it were, leading the charge for all American universities who've been challenged and threatened by the Trump administration with the withdrawal of funds and the taxation of donors and so on. What is your feeling about this? It seems to a lot of people around the world a really important struggle between academic freedom and the huge status of American universities in particular, and the Trump administration.
Well, I should say I've left electoral politics, but I'm still active and involved in politics on a number of different issues. I'm here in Harvard, as you know, as a Hauser leader. I don't speak for the institution, so I think it's very important to clarify that. But when I see the kind of research that gets done here and the kind of research that could be cut back on, it's finding treatments and cures for things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, childhood cancers, helping army veterans who've been injured in war to manage their pain. That's the kind of funding that's being cut, and that's I think not a good thing for the world. Harvard is saying very clearly that it will stand up for free speech, that it will stand up for academic freedom, that it will push back against government overreach, and I think that's very much in line with American values. But also talking to people here, there is an acknowledgement that maybe some things need to change, that anti-Semitism on campuses across America is a real problem, and that maybe there were some excesses. So, I don't think it's a totally belligerent response, but it is an institution that is standing up for those basic ideas: free speech, academic freedom, and opposing government overreach.
As a gay man, you've been generous in your comments about the late Pope. But I just wonder, what are your feelings about the atmosphere in these culture wars in America at the moment? There are quite a lot of LGBT people who are leaving America at the moment who are expressing deep concerns about how far this is going to go and whether there's going to be a kind of current of homophobia coming next. I'm thinking about people like Ellen DeGeneres, who's come over to the UK, and in Ireland has had some well-known American figures coming in as well.
Yeah, we've had a few, and a lot of Americans have Irish heritage and are entitled to Irish passports and are availing of those, and a small number have come to Ireland, and they're welcome. In a way, I'd prefer if they stayed and fought back, but that's obviously their decision, not mine. I have a problem with the culture wars generally, and they may have started in America. They're certainly affecting the UK, and anything that happens in the UK and America comes to Ireland as well, and we're starting to see the early evidence of that. I think above all, people need to learn to disagree better. It's okay to have different opinions, different ideas, different ideologies.
Yes.
What's not okay is to shout at each other and to take the view that somebody who's a different opinion than you is also a bad person.
And when it comes to, gender and sexuality, do you feel a rather ugly mood in the States at the moment?
That hasn't been my experience, and I'm over and back to the States all the time. In Boston now, was in Philadelphia last week, was in Chicago only a few weeks before. Admittedly, quite liberal, quite blue parts of America. Just walking around, living your life, you don't get a sense of the culture wars that you see online. And I think sometimes we spend so much time now on our phones and on our computers that we can get a false impression as to what day-to-day life is really like.
That is certainly true. Well, listen, the very, very best to you and to Harvard, and thank you so much for talking to LBC.
Thank you.